When Dakari returned from his latest business trip, Farai was waiting for him with news that would change their lives. As he stepped through the door, she approached him, her heart pounding in her chest. Dakari, she began, her voice trembling. I have something to tell you. He set his suitcase down and gave her a concerned look. What is it, Farai? Are you okay? She took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I'm pregnant. For a moment, Dakari just stared at her, as if the words hadn't fully registered. Then a slow smile spread across his face, and he pulled her into his arms. Alright, that's amazing, he exclaimed, his voice filled with joy. We're going to be parents. She clung to him, tears streaming down her face. He thought they were tears of joy, but she knew better. Still, as he held her and spoke excitedly about their future, she found herself wanting to believe it too. From that day on, Dakari treated her like she was the most precious thing in the world. He attended every doctor's appointment, made sure she had everything she needed, and even started cutting back on his work trips to be closer to her. For the first time in years, Farai felt truly loved by her husband, and despite the guilt that gnawed at her, she began to love him for it. When their son, Toby, was born, Dakari was over the moon. He held the baby with a look of pure awe, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, I'm so proud of you, Farai. I'm so proud of us. Watching him with their son, Farai promised herself that she would do whatever it took to protect their family, even if it meant carrying the burden of her secret for the rest of her life. 5 years passed, and life in their household was as close to perfect as Farai could have imagined. Bobby was a bright, energetic boy with his father's charm and his mother's sharp wit. Dakari adored him, spending hours playing games, reading bedtime stories, and teaching him new things. But Dakari's love for children didn't stop with Toby. They often spoke about wanting a bigger family, dreaming aloud about the siblings Toby would have one day. Farai, he said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Toby run around in the yard. I think it's time we gave him a little brother or sister. He'd be such a great big brother, don't you think? Farai smiled, though a pang of unease settled in her chest. Of course, she said softly. For the next year, they tried to conceive again, but month after month, their hopes were dashed. Dakari remained optimistic at first, but as time went on, his concern grew. Maybe we should see a doctor, he suggested one evening, just to make sure everything's okay. Farai agreed, though the thought of medical tests and questions filled her with anxiety. She pushed aside her fears, convincing herself that everything would work out. The visit to the hospital began with hopeful anticipation but ended with devastating news. The doctor explained gently that Dakari was infertile. His body couldn't produce fertile sperm, and it was unlikely he ever could. Dakari sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling. He barely registered the doctor's reassurances or Farai's hand on his arm. His thoughts kept circling back to one question. If he couldn't have children, then how was Toby his? The drive home was quiet. Farai watched him nervously, her heart pounding as she anticipated the conversation that was coming. When they arrived home, Dakari turned to her, his expression a mixture of confusion and pain. Farai, he said, his voice trembling. The doctor said I can't have children. If that's true, then how did you get pregnant? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Tell me the truth, he demanded, his voice rising. Toby, is he mine? Farai shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Dakari, please, I can explain. Explain what? He shouted. That you lied to me? That you let me believe he was my son? Just tell me the truth, Farai. Unable to bear the weight of his anger, Farai broke down. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. Dakari's face hardened. I'm doing a DNA test, he said. I need to know. The test results came back days later, confirming what Dakari had already suspected. Toby wasn't his biological son. The revelation shattered him. He confronted Farai again, his anger boiling over. Who is he? Dakari demanded, his voice shaking. Who is Toby's father? Farai tried to explain, but her words only seemed to fuel his fury. Who? He shouted. Finally, Farai whispered the truth. It's Hakeem. The name hung in the air like a curse. Dakari stared at her. Disbelief and rage etched across his face. My brother? He said. Farai nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Dakari, please. I never meant. Stop, he said, his tone cold. I trusted you. I knew he was no good, but I never thought you would do this to me. Dakari stormed up the stairs, his mind clouded with rage. Farai followed, her heart pounding. Dakari, where are you going? She cried. He didn't answer. He opened the closet, grabbed the gun he kept for emergencies, and headed back downstairs. Dakari, no! Farai screamed, running after him. I'm going to kill him, he said. He doesn't deserve to live after what he's done. Dakari, please, Farai begged, throwing herself in front of him. Think about Toby. Think about what this will do to him. But Dakari was beyond reason. He tried to push past her, his focus solely on revenge. Don't do this, she cried, grabbing at the gun. In the struggle, his finger slipped and the gun went off. Farai staggered back and fell down, her hand pressed to her chest. She looked at Dakari with wide, tear-filled eyes. The room was silent except for Farai's shallow, panicked breaths. Dakari stood over her. The raw anger that had consumed him moments ago is gone. His wife, his Farai, lay on the floor, blood spreading across her chest from the gunshot wound neither of them intended. Farai, he whispered, dropping the gun. He knelt beside her, his hands shaking, hovering over her wound, unsure of what to do. I didn't mean for this to happen. Her face was pale. Dakari, she called out, please, don't leave Toby. He needs you. Dakari froze. He stared into her tear-filled eyes and he felt a rush of emotions, but her words reminded him of something he seemed to have forgotten. She wasn't begging for forgiveness. She was still trying to manipulate him. Even now, after all she had done, she wanted him to carry the weight of her choices. Dakari stood abruptly, his jaw tightening as the clarity set in. Farai survived the wound. The shot had grazed her shoulder. Painful, but not fatal, so the hospital stay was short. Dakari didn't speak to her. He didn't even look at her. A week after the incident, she found him packing his bags in the bedroom. Dakari, wait, she said. Please don't do this. We can fix this. We can get through it. Dakari didn't stop packing. No, Farai, he said. There's no fixing this. Tears streamed down her face as she moved to block his path. You're going to abandon me? Abandon Toby? He's just a child, Dakari. He needs you. Dakari stared at her, emotionless. Toby is not my son. He was never mine. And you? You betrayed me in the worst way possible. I can't stay here, Farai. I can't look at you and pretend this didn't happen. But I love you, she cried, grabbing his arm. No, Farai, Dakari said. You love the idea of me, the man who stayed, the man who provided, the man who didn't know. But you didn't love me enough to be honest. You didn't love me enough to stay faithful. And now I can't love you enough to forgive you. With that, he walked out the door, leaving Farai sobbing on the floor. Months later, every corner of the home still reminded her of Dakari, the man she had once loved deeply, the man she had betrayed, and the man who had been Toby's father in every way that mattered. But Dakari didn't come back. He didn't call, didn't write, didn't even ask about Toby. She tried to be strong for Toby. She tried to pretend everything was fine, but guilt consumed her, and nothing she did could help her. One evening, as she sat alone in the quiet house, her chest tightened. The pain was sudden, sharp, and overwhelming. She clutched at her heart, gasping for breath, but there was no one there to help her. By the time neighbors found her, it was too late. Farai was gone. Hakeem stepped in after her death. He had stayed away from Farai and Dakari as they dealt with the fallout of their choices. But when he heard about Farai's passing, he knew he had to do what was right for Toby. He attended the funeral. Though it was a small, somber affair, Dakari didn't show up. After the burial, he took Toby into his care. The boy was too young to fully understand the depth of the tragedy surrounding him. To Toby, Uncle Hakeem was simply another safe, loving figure in his life. Someone who would look after him now that his parents were gone. Hakeem never told Toby the truth about his parentage. He decided that the boy didn't need to carry the weight of their mistakes. Toby, he said one night as they sat together on the porch, the stars twinkling above them. Your parents loved you more than anything in the world. Never forget that. Toby nodded, leaning against Hakeem's side. I miss them, Uncle Hakeem, he said softly. Hakeem wrapped an arm around the boy. I miss them too, Toby, but they're watching over you. They'll always be with you.
If you enjoyed this story, please click the thumbs up button. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, click the subscribe button or you won't hear my voice again. I'll catch you in the next episode with more tales from Folklore.